With Pakistan, not only Pakistan, but all of the Muslim world, for them to progress, they need to change the system that they're implementing. They're trying, with Muslims, wherever they're living, these systems that have been imposed on them since they were colonized are not ones which they fundamentally believe in, but they're ones which were imposed on them by the colonialists, right? So, for example, in Pakistan, they've now got a capitalist type system which fundamentally separates the authority of God or a creator from society. So the way in which legislation is made by the human being. This is in direct contradiction with the aqidah of the Muslims, which makes the legislator as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran and the Sunnah. Now, while the Muslims have an inconsistent point of reference to how they govern themselves and the point of reference to how they solve their day-to-day problems, while that's inconsistent, they'll remain in a state of deep decline. And the more consistent they are with their point of reference, the more revived they will be. That's not necessarily saying that's not just specific to Pakistan or just specific to Muslim people. That's human beings generally, right? The more consistent they are with their point of reference to their ideology, the more revived they are and the more progressive they are. And this you can see in history. It's what's happened with the Europeans when they ditched the church as as an authority to govern their politics and what have you, and the rise of capitalism. This also happened with the rise of communism, where their point of reference was consistent with an ideology. It was consistent with a system of governance, right? And those systems of governance, they have to be consistent with the nature of the human being for them to fully and really prosper, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, He says in Surah Ma'idah, that this day I have perfected for you your deen, and I've completed my favor upon you, and I've chosen Islam as your deen. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying is that this deen, this way of life, this ideology, right, has been perfected for you, and I have completed my favor upon you. Right? So the most optimal way for human beings to live, right, whether individually or on a societal level, is the one which has been ordained and being prescribed by the creator of the human being, which is the Islamic system. Right? So that Islamic system is there for an optimal way of life for Muslims and non-Muslims to live within its authority. So going back to the question of not just Pakistan, but all of the Muslim lands, they will fully prosper when they implement the ideology which is consistent with their aqidah, which is Islam, and also one which is most aligned with the nature of the human being and the most optimal way for human beings to live, as has been prescribed by the creator of the human being. When we isolate Pakistan from the bigger picture and we talk about progress, it might progress slightly in one particular way if it does things differently. But then also the question becomes as well, what is the definition of success as well? Because if it's implementing a capitalist system, which it is, or trying to emulate a capitalist system, then the success is defined as one which is measured in economic terms. Now, for it to compete and be successful economically, necessarily it has to excel in the control of the natural resources of the world. So it needs to implement an imperialist foreign policy, which is what the colonialists do, and this is why they are economically somewhat successful, because they've been able to control the natural resources of the world to the extent where you got poverty on such extreme levels in many different parts of the world. You got the IMF crippling economies and countries, third world developing countries, left, right, and center, just so that a handful of few capitalist nations in the world can really benefit from that. So it's just a way and a means to replace a physical colonization with one which is more covert, but yet more efficient as well. All right. So for Pakistan to progress economically, it would have to inflict the same level of violence and cruelty as the colonialist powers in order to compete and to control the natural resources of the world at the expense of human suffering. And the thing is that with any country, nation, block of people, it's not for them to progress in things. It's not just one aspect. It's not just economics. But it's a combination of economic, social, ruling, aspects of society that which they still need a point of reference for. So the economic system would be much dependent upon also the ruling system. The ruling system is also very dependent on, the social system. So all of these different mechanisms and moving parts are intertwined and interdependent on each other to work efficiently. And like, I mentioned is that the most optimal way for human beings to live is in accordance with the system that the creator of the human being has provided. And there are unfortunately, there are no halfway measures. People, will often, suggest these pragmatic suggestions for some aspects of progress, but it has to be from the ground up, from the foundation. It needs to be a complete and comprehensive change of the system itself, of the ideology itself. It's like a car, right? If you have a clapped out banger and you got somebody in the driving seat and he's not doing a very good job of driving that vehicle, right, in a race, let's say, and then somebody else comes along and says, oh, I'm a better driver, I can do better than he can. Okay, maybe you can, but in the vehicle that you have, the vehicle that you're driving, all the variables are still the same. You've got the same size engine, you got the same suspension, you got the same tires, you got the same structure of the vehicle. All of these moving parts work together to perform in the race, right? But what's actually required is to actually change the vehicle itself. So move away from this clapped out banger and get a different vehicle. And the vehicle, what I'm in reference to as a metaphor, is to actually change the ideology itself. And by changing the ideology in the system, which is endorsed by the creator of the human being, that is the way in which you create the most optimal way for human beings to live.